With the 3D printing complete on all of the suit pieces, my designing and printing have been completed. We are now able to move on to finishing it and painting it. My pieces start off in this kind of raw state where you can see the pattern and texture of my 3D prints. This is not acceptable, in my opinion, for what I'm going for. So I have had to do some research onto what kinds of finishes I want to do on these 3D prints. In the end, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to use a graphite finish on these 3D print files in order to create kind of a more realistic metallic look on these armor pieces. A graphite finish is kind of complicated in how it comes together. And in the end, you use actual graphite in order to create a metal finish. Now, if you're familiar with any kind of like general pencil, like a number 2 pencil or any kind of art pencil, graphite is what we use in that. And if you look at a pencil and you've ever gotten any of it on your hand, you can see kind of that shiny metallic finish on your hand afterwards. This is what we are trying to go for on the outside of this. I have watched several creators in how they finish their graphite armor pieces. And after doing a little of experimentation, I did come up with a strategy that did work for me personally and where I live and what kind of effects I was working towards when I was making these pieces. The first thing that I needed to do was to assemble some of my larger pieces. I did have both of my shoulder parts as well as my belt pieces were too big to fit on my 3D printer, so I needed to assemble them. Once my pieces were assembled and the glue was dry, I did kind of go over lightly all of my pieces with some sanding. The sanding was less to make it smooth and more to just rough up the surface. I did this with a 150 grit sandpaper so that I could get my filler and my paints to adhere better to the surface of the 3D print plastics, the PLA. So we sand it down quickly just to kind of rough up that surface. I am going to use filler and I am going to use spray paints to get to the finish on these pieces that I'm looking for. Once the sanding is complete, I then tested some different ways of filling in my print lines on my parts. I've seen a few different recommendations, and since I'm looking for a very specific visual on these parts, I decided to try a couple of different things. I used filler primer, which seems to fill in some of the smaller cracks and details. It does not take care of any larger print lines that can be more prominent. Then I'm trying Mod Podge. Mod Podge is more popularly used on foam, but I wanted to see if it would work on 3D print files. But in the end, I ended up using Quick Seal. I know a lot of people use Bondo or other kinds of like wood filler primers, but I had Quick Seal on hand, so that's what I ended up using. So, as for the final paint process involved several different steps. The first step, after sanding everything down, just on the raw PLA plastic to rough up the edges, I then filled with Quick Seal. And I just kind of spread the Quick Seal on with this silicone spreader. This is an actual face mask applicator. I know a lot of people you can buy these at craft stores now, but I just used one I had left over from face mask application. But I filled in all of my larger print lines and defects in all of my prints using the quick seal. I let that dry for a day and came back and sanded all of that smooth. And I sanded, this is my second sanding. I used a 220 grit sandpaper in order to get a lot of the extra texture down, but also get it smooth enough for painting from there. After I sanded it with the 220 sandpaper, I did my first coat of the filler primer. Since I have all of the larger texture issues taken care of, the filler primer is really great for taking care of some of these smaller imperfections that are left behind by the sandpaper. I spray this on and then allow it to dry overnight. I don't want to overdo any kind of paint layering because I am sanding this. I don't want to end up gumming this up or anything. We are taking our time to make sure that everything has a proper amount of time to dry in between layers and coats so that we don't end up ruining our texture on accident because we're trying to rush our results. After our first coat of filler primer, I go in back with some 320 sandpaper, slowly getting smoother and smoother sandpaper as we work through this process. And I sand down the filler primer with this 320 sandpaper to then prime the surface for a second coat of filler primer. We add the second coat of filler primer because, again, I am looking for something that is going to look like metal when we're done, and I don't want too many imperfections left behind. So as I go, I kind of am judging whether or not I'm pleased with it, and I did end up needing 2 coats of the filler primer, and that's okay. I almost did a 4th coat on some of these pieces, but in the end, I decided that a little bit of imperfection was okay. It made it seem a little bit more wear and tear. But the amount of sandpaper that I went through in order to get these results was ridiculous.
Fun little fact about me, I grew up helping my parents build furniture. They had a shop in their garage and that's what their little independent business makes. And so I did so much hand sanding for money to go out and buy junk as a kid. I could go out into the shop and sand. I freaking hate hand sanding. But if I want these 3D print pieces to turn out nice looking, which by the way, they are looking pretty sharp, if I might add, I have to hand sand. It is the worst process for me. I hate it so much, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it for the end results. But it is the worst.
All right, so the last part of this, once we have done 2 coats of filler primer, is to do a clear coat of spray paint. I take the clear coat of spray paint, and where I live, the amount of time will vary according to how hot and moisture in the air, but for where I'm living, I allow the clear coat of spray paint to sit for 20 minutes so that it is not wet to the touch, but still kind of a little bit soft. After I have allowed it to cure for 20 minutes, I then go back in with this pot of powdered graphite. And I have a little chamois cloth. And if you're unfamiliar with what a chamois cloth is, chamois cloths are used in creating like graphite and charcoal artworks. They're used for spreading the pigment around the page in larger areas. They are very soft because you don't want to like damage the fibers of the paper for your art. So it is a very, very soft cloth, and I am just picking up the graphite with this chamois cloth and softly kind of like rubbing it into this only partially cured clear spray paint. We are only allowing the spray paint to partially cure so that the powdered graphite will stick to the soft spray paint. Then that way it won't just fall off. Then, just for my own personal reasons, I decided that it needed a second coat of graphite. And this is important because I could kind of see some color distortions along the pieces that have been 3D printed. So I did do a second coat of the clear coat, 20 minutes, and then rubbing the graphite into the surface in order to create a more cohesive color to the finished piece. This is how the pieces ended up. They turned out really nice. The graphite does give it a nice metallic sheen. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the fingerprints and things that do show up because the graphite reacts to the oils in your fingers. That's something that I will take into consideration next time I am deciding to make armor and looking for metallic effects. But it does look really cool, and I am happy with how things ended up. And I am ready to move on, hopefully soon, to putting all of this together on the power suit.